the drugs were never the problem, then what's the problem? And everyone in the rooms always says that it's a you thing, it's a me thing, right? And there's other things in the program that really rub me the wrong way, like how we give our power away and how we have to admit that we're powerless over the addiction. And again, to your point, those are words. And if we relate to those words in a way that we accept them as true, then we're going to remain powerless and we're going to remain an addict.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, it is my honor to welcome our guests because I believe they're coming with a couple of things that I deem very expensive. At time, 24 hours has been offered to every man and woman on this planet. What we do with our time, man, will say much about our life. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It created Trey, gave him some stuff, and we want access to the stuff that it gave him. What are those stuff? His wisdom, his knowledge, his insights that he acquired for his obedience, if you will, to the journey. And in order for him to let us have access to that, Trey has to become vulnerable, man. And we want to create a space by which he feels safe so that we can have access to that. Trey, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thank you for having me, Ken. It is a pleasure to be here this morning.
It's an honor, sir. One of the questions that I ask everyone that comes on is in relationship to that aspect of servanthood, because I believe that's like a gift that we all get an opportunity to experience, and many don't have that opportunity. And I welcome them to come and hurry up and get there. My question to you, Trey, is simply this. How do you serve mankind?
I serve mankind, just the answer that off the top of my head, I serve mankind by every day waking up and getting my own self out of my own way and being a leader and being a beacon to the inner work that we all feel at some level calling us to do. And by doing that inner work myself, I imagine that I would be a beacon towards others as I've already been in my life. And that beacon serves for attracting people that are curious about what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, the changes that I'm making, the subconscious patterns that I'm reprogramming, the awareness that I'm gaining. And so, my life's been transforming over the last year and a half. And just off the top of my head, that's primarily how I would say I serve mankind. And then additionally to that, I just started an imagination coach business, and I would imagine that serving mankind would be through that imagination coach business where I work one-on-one with individuals. And I really, through the power of imagination and feeling, I really help others step into their intentional manifestation powers. And also through me identifying the language that they use, I'm able to identify where they are limited, where their limiting beliefs might be rooted back to. And then I help them work backwards through language, through just reprogramming the way they relate to the language, and also offering them different language to use that's more free and more full with potential and possibility rather than limitation and lack. And through all of that myriad of tools and techniques, I've seen real, true transformation and true change at a very deep level with clients that I work with.
And that is awesome, man. And that's the thing. Most of us, those words that we say, and those are the stories that we tell ourselves and we program ourselves. And I always try to make people alert that to be very careful what you say, because you are listening to what you are saying. And what you're saying is actually programming yourself. So be very careful as to what you say and how you say it, as Trey talked about. Those are the words that will use to ensnare you. And he has to find those words because you're so accustomed to speaking them and letting them loose.
Yeah.
As instead, that words are spells that we put on our being as a result. One of our custom hair traits to go back, I call it our beginnings, man. And we usually start in our family. We have some of us, we have a mom and dad, 2-parent thing. And we are going to learn a couple of stuff right there at this beginning, if you will. And usually we learn about our behaviors are developed there, the mindsets also that we start developing, which will then form our perception. All these wonderful things begin to happen there, man. Trauma sometimes enter in that family, through the family, or outside of the family. But something usually happened to us that will cause our perspective to begin to form a certain way. What was your family unit like?
On podcasts, I don't get asked this question often, so I appreciate you asking. The fun part for me will be just kind of recounting all of the things, because in the current work that I'm doing internally right now is filled with a lot of remembering and accessing memories that I've suppressed or that I've just done away with. And so, let me just dive into that. My parents divorced when I was 2. So don't remember the divorce, but I do remember growing up in separate households.
Hmm.
I moved with my mom every single year. I moved, I think it was, I counted 14 times in 17 years. So before I was 18, before I was an adult out of the house, we moved around 14 times. And out of those 14 times, I changed schools about 10 or 11. I think I remember going back. And for me, in my younger years as a young adult, I used to relate to those experiences in a way that was very limiting because when I
Hmm.
look through the lens of my childhood, I realized that my life was very up and down. It was very uncertain and unstable. And when I reflect back on my experiences as a child, I remember getting into a lot of trouble. I remember, getting spanked as a child, and I remember all of these things that I remember all of these results that would show up in my life as I'm dissecting them now as a 32-year-old man. And just the mental frameworks that I have now, I'm able to really understand why I was getting those results in my life. And how I've related back to that upbringing was that one of the biggest pieces of who I used to be was someone who believed that there was something to worry about constantly, because what life taught me as a young kid was that life was uncertain and unstable. And so there was always something to worry about,
Yeah.
whether it was I had to worry about the next school year to make new friends, whether it was to worry if I'm going to have to pack up and move my place, which is what happened quite often.
Yeah.
I may have been worried that I wasn't
Hmm.
going to be accepted in school or what have you. So there was this constant worry and this state of worry that I would put myself in and that I would accept as true. And it wasn't until just recently, maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, that I was able to dissolve that limiting belief that I accepted as a child and step more into the adult belief that I have now, which is I am powerful and I have the empowerment that I can shape my reality in whichever way I choose. Why I have the gift of imagination and why I have the human condition of feeling, and combining those will actually create my circumstances outside of me.
Yeah.
Really, my childhood was full of worry and instability and uncertainty. And a lot of those feelings stayed with me through the adolescent years, the teenage years, and then the young adult years. And it wasn't until I became a father at 25 that I really started taking introspection a little deeper, and I started getting more towards, I got closer towards the roots. And then it wasn't until just 2 years
Hmm.
ago that I was equipped with the tools to really learn how to dissolve those limiting beliefs. And what I mean by dissolve is awareness. We both know that awareness typically is the first step. Becoming aware of something, you
Yeah.
then have the freedom to change it, right? You understand that there's a disconnect or maybe a disharmony, whether it's with internally or externally. Okay. And so the awareness is that level and that leading point to then create real change and to actually dive into real change. And so what I mean by when I say dissolving is when you start going back to these limiting beliefs, like one of my limiting beliefs was I'm not deserving of a stable place, right? And that led me back to I am powerless over my circumstances, right? Or over life. And if you listen carefully when I say those limiting beliefs, they both start with I am. And in my line of
Hmm.
work, what I help people understand is the I am is such a powerful declaration that we as humans make. It's so powerful that the I amness is actually the impression that we make on our subconscious to then accept it as true. And so the I am
Yeah.
statements that we make are typically, I like to think of them as the top of the table, the I ams, whether it's I am powerless or I am
Yeah.
undeserving or I am not safe or whatever the case is. And then that's the tabletop. And then all of the limiting beliefs that support that I am, which in my case, if I am undeserving or if I am powerless, then, I'm going to keep getting in trouble because I can't fix myself, right? Or I can't behave in a certain way that my
Yeah.
parents want to. Or if I'm undeserving, then of course life doesn't work out for me or I have bad luck. All of these limiting beliefs would support the tabletop of the I am, right? And so what I say when I say dissolving those beliefs, understanding the legs of your table and understanding the tabletop is the awareness part. But then asking really deep questions when you're in that state of vulnerability, when you recognize, hey, I still have a child belief here that I'm running up against or that's controlling or dictating my life. I'm going to ask myself the questions. One, is this belief actually an absolute truth to me today, right now? And usually people will say, well, no, right? And then when I work with them, all the time, people are going to say, well, no, that's actually not a truth, an absolute truth as it is today. And so once you understand and you can break free from identifying from the belief that you had as a child, you can let that go and dissolve it and start re-identifying with your current beliefs. That's what I mean by dissolving the limiting beliefs that you used to hold on to, and then meet yourself where you are, which is you're adopting and you're re-identifying with the current belief that you do have. And so it presents people with freedom to choose, to freedom to feel, and freedom to live more in possibility instead of living more in probability. And so I guess to answer the question, I know that was a little long-winded, but my roots really did come from the perfect recipe to give me everything that I could ever imagine having as a person who serves others. I have so much to relate to people on. I have so much common ground I can find with other people through shared suffering and through childhood experiences that, yeah, I would say my childhood was perfect because of all the things I went through, and I'm grateful for all of them.
That's one of the reasons why I do this, is this journey, if you will, this linear journey, is to go back and show people that they're, number one, we are just common people, but there are threads that follow us as a result of trauma. However, that trauma shows up, as you described perfectly, through the moving, the uncertainty that you were used to as a young individual, acceptance, all these things are going to become threads that will be a part of our life, and that
Sure.
we usually are in a survival mode until our 20s, and when that day happens, Trey, when we have to face it, as you said, we have to become an observer. We have to now, we're noticing some things, and we become that observer that begins to look and begin to ask those questions. When we become the observer, as Trey mentioned, that is the beginning of the journey. That is beginning of enlightenment, because we are now going to probe, and we begin to probe by the questions again, the words that we line up and form these sentences. So words are powerful, as Trey had alluded to in the beginning of this podcast. Trey, let's jump straight up, because I always tell people there's life happens, and that's years. I end up, and in our 20s and late 20s and early 20s is sometime when things happen there, either family come into play or something, loss of job, loss of a relationship. Stuff started happening there to awake us to the fact that there's something deeper. Talk to me about your awakening, if you will, that incident. And it's usually several that come, and then one day it just comes, and we are thrown into the aspect of, as you said, we become aware of things. Talk to us about the day and the incident that made you become aware of things.
I'm going to talk about two because that's just what I'm called to talk about. The first disruption, I would kind of frame them, would be my best friend, my brother, passing away. He died in 2016, in July in 2016. And that disruption for me, I mean, I was 30 or I was 23, I think. That was the first time. I mean, I'd been to funerals, I'd lost family members, but that was the first time, man, that like, I mean, we spent every day together. We grew up together. I'd known him for longer than I didn't know him at that time, but for many years. And when that disruption happened, it was such an interesting thing because he passed away. And in the same month, I got my girlfriend pregnant. And that year, the loss of my best friend threw me into a place of turmoil, for sure, as disruption often can do.
Mhm.
And it was the same year that year I actually moved away to Washington State because I was going to move down to Oregon in the United States to participate in the legal cannabis industry. It had just opened up in 2014. It just became medically and recreationally legalized in a few states. And it was what I was passionate about and whatnot. So I moved out to Washington to kind of help myself find where I was going to be in Oregon. I had a friend out there. And anyway, I did that for about a few months, and I came back that same year that my friend passed away, my best friend. I came back to celebrate my birthday in December, and lo and behold, the woman at the time that was pregnant with my child, she has the same birthday as me, as December 1st. And we were celebrating because we were in the same friends group. And she told me, hey, I'm 4.5 months pregnant on my birthday. And she had just found out like a week prior. And again, there was another disruption, right? So like I was obviously acting very selfish when my best friend passed away because it was all about how I'm feeling, and it was all about, this is the worst thing. And, my life had turned upside down, and I was obviously into a lot of substances at that time that were obviously not healthy and conducive for my growth and potential. But then I get this news that same year that I'm going to be a father. And not only that, but I've got like 4 months to prepare, and then I've got not only that, but I have this choice to move back to Texas and to completely redirect my efforts and to change my course again, all within the same year. I feel like that happened maybe two or three times, two or three big life-changing events happened in that year. And so I would say that those two disruptions as a mixture really set me on the path of not only betterment, but it set me on a path where I refused to accept what I was conditioned to accept. I refused to accept what I felt like I was being conditioned to accept. And I didn't know if it was
Yeah.
me conditioning myself. I didn't know if it was me just accepting it outwardly. I just didn't really know. But for the longest time, I've been told that I'm a deep thinker and wise for my age, even at a, young age, 11, I'm talking. And anyways, and so that year, I would imagine that those are the two disruptions that really set me on my path. And, my example when I was growing up for a father, I did have a dad, but my dad was more caught up in work and making the millions. And I would see my dad every other weekend and sometimes at my baseball games or practices. And I think that I don't know if that really molded. I really don't know. I've actually been thinking about this quite often. But when I became a father, it wasn't like usually we're told when we're fathers or when we become parents, we either take what we experienced as a child from our parents and utilize it, or we do the opposite. For me, it was like
Yeah.
I really didn't even use it as a point of reference, not until at least my daughter was already like 5. And I think I had my other daughter coming at that time that I really think about my dad's parenting versus my parenting. But what I realized is that the pursuit of being a better father in alignment with how deep I was willing to go with myself in combination with now I have this human being outside of me that if I were to die and I were to put my life to waste or risk my life unnecessarily, that it would impact that little girl's world much more than anybody else in this world. And so my thought process started to change, my perspective started to change, my selflessness and my selfishness contingency that relationship started to develop and mature. And yeah, I wanted deeper, not only for myself, but for my kiddo, because I realized that, being in the world of drugs for quite some time at all different levels, and that's definitely a story for another time. But being in that world really showed me a lot of suffering. And at that time, I remember getting into a lot of Jordan Peterson's work, and I really liked his take on suffering. And then I got more into other people's work around suffering and how, it's necessary, but it's optional. And anyway, so to dive down that, that I think those two disruption points of that year, losing my best friend and finding out that I was going to be a father, those really set my life on this path, man. And I'm, it's taken me a while to be grateful for my best friends, passing and how that's played a part in just the whole mankind, but also my life. But I'm there, and it's been a journey. It's been beautiful. But I know that if he was alive and he was here, he'd be right here where I'm sitting, looking for this work
Yeah.
and looking for this freedom and finding the levels of freedom that I've found because he lived in a way that I was so attracted to. I remember he always was looking for ways to be better. And I say always not lightly
Yeah.
because I'm very careful with my words, but I say always because that's how I knew him.
Let me ask you this question because, again, once we become aware, we have to now begin our process, if you will. And Jordan Peterson is one of mine, one individual that I follow and listen to. I listen to quite a few men over my life, and he has been instrumental in mine. What tools and what processes did you bring into your life? I know listening to Jordan, you'll get a couple of them there, but what did you bring into your space? What was those things that helped Trey now to begin to make those necessary pivots to cause him to become a better individual, begin to
Mm.
see, if you will, that the subconscious being plays a great role in how we manage our life? What began to happen to you? What were those tools for those that are listening, Trey? Someone may be, at that space, and give them some directions out, if you will, some of the things that you use to help you in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in 2023, some pretty big changes started happening for me. There was another disruption, and the disruption was my lady leaving me. She left me because I was not being the man that I knew I could be, but I also wasn't being the partner that I committed to being. And so that disruption was pretty big for me. And then whenever I started to climb out of that hole, excuse me, I started I started doing the work. And what I realized was I have to get I have to, first of all, my first step, right, is I must stop putting things in my body that deaden my spirit.
Yeah.
That was number one. Once I gained the freedom from that, then I was able to choose how I wanted things to look. So then I started listening to people. I've been reading a lot of books, for at least 8 years that my daughter's been alive. And since I found out I was going to be a dad, I've been reading a whole lot of books. The things that propelled me forward were when I stopped deadening my spirit with substances, I went to Narcotics Anonymous program. And that helped me identify spiritual principles. And spiritual principles in my personal life, how they've helped me is prior to that year, 2023, and prior to NA, I had never really been a principled person. And when I take a look at where men usually learn principles, I look at my father and I'm like, father's really not a principled person either. And I look at his father and I'm like, his father's not very principled either. And it's not because it's, when I say not principled, I don't mean not structured. I don't mean not disciplined, because my grandpa absolutely
Hmm.
is definitely disciplined. And my dad certainly is disciplined as well. And they both have structure. But when I say that, I mean, like, there's certain levels of freedom that you can tell people have from their own selves. And then you can start sensing where people trap their own selves. And my grandpa certainly trapped his own self, and my dad certainly trapped his own self, right? And that's kind of what I mean by that. But when principled to me meant, how am I going to show up? And then when Narcotics Anonymous taught me about spiritual principles, they talk about three initially. They talk about open-mindedness, willingness, and honesty. And prior to that, I was a dishonest person. Prior to that, I would like to have admitted that I was pretty open-minded. That's pretty consistent. That's stayed pretty consistent throughout my life. But the willingness part was where I kind of got a little fuzzy. I was like, am I a willing person? Like, I thought about how picky I was with foods. I thought about, how comfortable I was with places and people, and I told myself the story why I only want to do this because I'm good at this, or, whatever the things were. Like, I really started to look inward and ask myself, how willing am I being? Because there's the principle of honesty. So I was being honest with myself through the program.
Yeah.
And I liked the program. I'm not sure how much familiar you are with the NA program, but I liked the
Yeah.
program
Yeah.
because, one, it taught me spiritual principles, right, that I could build on. But two, it taught me a framework where I could do that inventory on myself, and I could check in with myself and
Hmm.
write and start having a
Yeah.
daily habit where I'm writing to people that I may never talk to, writing to myself that I,
Yeah.
am impressing upon, or I'm writing about things just to get my thoughts in order. So the NA program taught me the spiritual principles and the kind of activities to do. And eventually I left the program because I understood that the program, two things about the program. And for anybody listening, if you're in the spot that Ken was talking about, go anyway, because if you practice the open-mindedness, then you'll understand I can be open to this experience and take from it, and be open that the universe or God or whatever you believe in is guiding me to here to learn. And so
Yeah.
when the reason I did leave my own self is that Narcotics Anonymous and programs alike, they were very focused on the literature and helping people identify with the literature. But that what they got wrong, in my opinion, was they talk about these programs being spiritual programs, which I think is very much needed in order to combat substance abuse. However, when they talk about the identification points within the program, all of the identification points that they mention are human identification points. So if it's a spiritual program, where is the
Hmm.
spiritual identification point? Because in that same time, I was learning to relate to my own experience in the world as I am spiritual being having a human experience. And the more that I stepped into that, the more that I felt it, the more that I resonated with it, the more that I applied it to my world, and the more that I wore that belief as a lens, if you will, to look at the world through. And the more that I understood, hey, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, and I actually don't have to identify only with the human experience, because that will keep me out of
Hmm.
spirit. Then I started to
Yeah.
see some of the faults of Narcotics Anonymous, because at the very beginning, they say, they go around the room and said, I am an addict. My name is Trey. I'm an addict. Right. And there's that I am declaration. And that time I was learning how potent I am was. And so anyways, I
Yeah.
kept going back for about a year after I started having issues with it because I still wanted to be around people that wanted pursuit of betterment. When I'm there, people want to be
Hmm.
clean, they want to be better, they want to be better versions of themselves. But what I also learned as I stayed there, which I'm glad that I did for that year, but what I learned was the same people were starting to come into the rooms. And I used to go 3 to 5 times a week. So I was there, I was committed. But what I learned was the same people would come back in with the very similar stories that they told last week or the week prior. And they were stories around how they were still stuck. And what I noticed was that one of the things that they celebrate in Narcotics Anonymous was, yay, we're free from drugs, but we know that the drugs were never the problem. So if the drugs, my
Yeah.
question was, if the drugs were never the problem, then what's the problem? And everyone in the rooms always says that it's a you thing, it's a me thing, right? I'm the problem. And there's other things in the program that really rub me the wrong way, like how we give our power away and how we have to admit that we're powerless over the addiction and things like that. And again, to your point, those are words. And if we relate to those words in a way that we accept them as true, then we're going to remain powerless and we're going to remain an addict. And the way that I explain it to people is, when let's say that you have an uncle in the family, and let's say that every Thanksgiving everyone gets together and the uncle's an alcoholic. Everyone knows the uncle's an alcoholic. Everyone knows that the uncle has problems when he drinks or of drinking. And so when Thanksgiving comes around nowadays, when Thanksgiving comes around nowadays, people start putting up the liquor. They start being more careful around the words that they choose. They start subconsciously signaling to that person that that person's still an addict, that that person has a problem.
Hmm.
And so subconsciously, what they're signaling to that person, that addict, is, hey, you still have a problem, and we don't trust that that problem can show up any different way. And so that addict is still going to remain in that space, not only because he's putting himself and choosing to be in that space for himself, but his external is confirming back to him what he already believes to be true about himself, which is I'm an addict. However, what I've been taught
Yeah.
is that we have the freedom to shift from what I call what I call probability, right? Perfected probability, which is the mind. That's our pursuit of using the
Hmm.
mind, which is to anticipate, it's to analyze, it's to get ahead of. We use the mind to do all of these things, right? To get certainty and put form around the world, in the world around us. But we have the freedom all the time to shift from probability into pure possibility. And so what I've been taught
Yeah.
is the more you can stop minding things, the more that you can stop putting your own assumptions on how things are going to go out, how things are going to play out. And the more you can live in, hey, the truth is, I don't know. The truth is, I'm open to possibilities. I'm open to seeing what could happen with this person. I'm open to seeing what could happen in this circumstance or this situation or this setting. The more you can live in that, you allow for more miracles to happen. You allow for
Yeah.
the external to formulate in a way that actually reflects back that open mindedness.
Yeah. I get it. Let me ask you this question, Trey. Since you've gone through all of that and you said you recognized that there were some things that, didn't sit right because of your insight. Talk to me as to, let's say someone, and you mentioned earlier in the onset that of what you're doing now, how you're serving. When someone comes to you now and they are in similar situation that you were at, what process, because once you recognize certain things, you're going to see some processes that you need to put in place, to help them. What process would you utilize if someone shows up again, and they're in that situation, they're a little confused. Now you're going to help them identify their speech, what they're saying and stuff like that. What is your process to assist those that are listening to you and I to navigate them from where they are in that stuck place to where they're walking in that freedom place?
Okay. Before I get to that, I just want to go right back to the previous question, my answer. I did totally
Yeah.
forget. I wanted to mention 3 mentors that I've taken personally on in my own life just recently, the last 12 to 18 months. So
Yeah.
one of them is, 2 of them are still alive. One of them's not alive anymore, but one of them is Neville Goddard. He's not alive anymore. Neville Goddard
Yep.
talks about the feeling is the secret and the power of imagination. And that's been really transformative for me because through my work with Peter Crone, who is another mentor of mine, he is alive and he's
Yeah.
still kicking, and he is very, very good at what he does and talks a lot about the I am and I am not context that we all live in that I mentioned earlier. I did go through his mastermind and get the tools that he was teaching for coaches in his mastermind. So that was really helpful for me. And then I would say one person that a lot of people go to that is really solid is Tony Robbins. He talks a lot
Yeah.
about energy at the energetic level and how you can program yourself energetically to then get
Yeah.
different results in the life and take massive action. That was really important for me too, because Neville Goddard's work helped me understand that my imagination creates my reality, and that the feeling that
Mhm.
I maintain throughout my days is what I'm ultimately telling the universe to give back to me. And that, in combination with Tony Robbins' work, was really transformative, because Tony Robbins helps you maintain that emotional and energetic state. And then all of
Yeah.
that to say that in my process, I use all of that work, but I also Peter Crone. Peter Crone is someone who exists in the dissolving of limitations. So I'll go back to the question
Yes.
now,
Now go
the
ahead.
question of the now, my
Yeah.
process. So currently I'm working with someone who I actually met in the Narcotics Anonymous room. So we have a lot of shared common ground and shared suffering. And fortunately for me, I'm able to cheat a little bit on this client because I've heard him speak in the rooms. We did have a little
Yeah.
friendship before, so like I do know a little bit more about him than if he was just someone I didn't know much about. But just to mention my process, the one of the best things that I can offer for people is a space where they can just be honest and they can just be open
Yeah.
to how they relate to the world, to their circumstances, and to themselves. And what I ask people to do is just, hey, start talking.
Yeah.
Just start being truthful, right? Because the default that people use, right, is more revealing than if they're put on the spot or if they're being forced to think about their words before they use them. So first of all, I get people in a comfortable space and I start listening, and I listen for the limiting language. So I have a practice that I'm very new to, actually about 3 months new to, but I've noticed that a lot of my mentors and people I look up to that do this kind of work, freedom work, they have used this technique in their freedom work. So I was like, well, I probably should use it and learn it too. And it's called neurolinguistics programming. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's NLP for short.
Mhm.
And as I've been learning that over the past 3 or 4 months, the words, the limiting languages that we use is the best indicator. It's the first indicator on where I can go deeper with someone. So I'll kind of break down the words, the limiting language a little bit for the listeners, and then I'll move down to my further process. But some of the words I look out for are what I like to call impossibility language. So when people put impossibility into their words, and like can't and won't and don't and haven't and shouldn't, and things like relating to the experience as if they needed permission or that they didn't have access to, something like that, right? So that's impossibility language. And there's something called necessity language, where people would say, I needed to do this, or I
Mhm.
have to do this, or I must do this in order for this to happen. And they put a sense of necessity on themselves. And again, that's programming that's picked up from parents or from childhood. But that sense of necessity will put people in a very anxiety filled lifestyle. And so I look out for the necessity pieces of language. I look out for the impossibility pieces of language. And then from that, I'm really able to understand, okay, where is this person limited, right? So for example, one client that I've worked with, right? So there was this belief that they had where access was a big thing for them. So they kept bringing up the words, I don't have access to it, or I can't access this, right? So I kept listening for that and all of the language that was used around access. And what I realized was what I challenged them on was their belief around accessing whatever it was, whether it was their higher self, whether it was accessing information, whether it was accessing
Mhm.
freedom from their emotions, whatever it was, there was this belief that there was distance between them and their desires, which was accessibility. And so what I've learned from Neville Goddard's work is the only distance between us and our desires is the distance that we put on them in our own mind. It's the distance that we accept as true.
Yeah.
And so the limiting language is the first piece in my process, right? How are they relating to themselves, to the world around them? Then I look for triggers. So the triggers are really easy because once the limiting language in combination with the triggers is illuminated to me, I'm like, okay, I know where to go for the root. So the limiting language will illuminate, if you will, where we can make quick changes, right? Because language is easy, right? You can just reframe and use different words because we have the words, we have the vocabulary. We're just programmed to continue to use and relate to our experiences with these words. So we make the shift. But when it comes to the triggers, let's say someone's got a job and they're triggered by their boss or their manager. And when they come to me and they're talking about their triggers or where they feel stuck or feel disrupted, I'm asking them those questions. And let's say they're talking about their manager. Well, that's a big trigger, right? So then I start asking deeper questions, right? And people can go through this process themselves, which I'm assuming why you're asking. And so what I would do is I would say, look, where are my triggers? Where do I feel like I get disrupted emotionally? So if I'm driving behind the wheel on the way to work and I'm getting in traffic and I start cussing, or if someone cuts me off on the way to work and I drive 75 miles an hour right next to them and, give them the bird, whatever I'm doing outside of myself that if it's misaligned with how I'm truly wanting to be internally, I look for that. And so we understand that the triggers are illuminating how that individual is likely feeling before the triggers. So let me explain. The trigger is the opportunity for the human to reveal back to the human what has power over them. It's the easiest way to look at it. So
Yeah.
if I'm triggered over my boss, then my boss has got power, right? If I'm triggered over my girlfriend not listening, then that's got power over me. If I'm triggered over someone driving like shit on the road, then that has power over me. And so the triggers will illuminate what's got power over you, where you're giving your power up to. And then as you understand, okay, I'm giving my power up to, let's say, my boss, right? So for this example, I feel powerless with my boss, and my boss is igniting stuff within inside of me that's getting me frustrated. But I'm frustrated not because I don't like my boss, but because my boss has the power to my certainty, my feeling of security, my feeling of trusting that I'll be able to pay my bills with the money I'm making from this job. And so we understand that the trigger is actually surrounded by a whole lot of other feelings, like the feeling of despair, the feeling of desperation, the feeling of insecurity. And so as we're feeling those three things, despair, insecurity, and desperation, then we're going to continue to seek out things subconsciously in our external experience that will show back to us that we're feeling insecure and desperate and despair and those kind of things. And so the feeling is the secret, as Neville Goddard's work shows, that the feelings that you maintain on a daily basis typically is how your experience is going to continue to unfold. So as we reverse the process, the trigger will show us where we're not free, but it's also going to illuminate all the feelings, most of the feelings that we're feeling that lead up to the triggered moment. So then when we understand, okay, we see the trigger, we understand the feelings that I'm feeling ahead of the trigger and also after the trigger, then we can understand and are aware of those feelings, we make a shift. So if we're feeling like we're insecure because maybe we don't make enough money and this job is going to help us pay the rent, and we're feeling insecure because without this job, we wouldn't pay the rent, then we're focusing on all the lack. We're focusing on all of the stuff that's going to continue to get us more lack, because what you focus on expands. Rather, you can shift. You have all the freedom all the time to shift how you're feeling in the state that you assume from. So if I assume that my life is full of lack, I'm going to continue to get lack. If I assume that my life is full of abundance, it's the law of assumption that Neville Goddard talks about. But if I assume that my life is full of abundance, then that's what I can do to counteract the assumption of lack. If I can assume the feeling of security ahead of having any external validation that I should feel secure, then I have the freedom to choose how I'm feeling, which is ultimately going to shape my reality. So my main point is that once you understand how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis, counteract those feelings by visualization techniques, by imagination techniques. And that's where I come in to help people unlock and open up their imagination. Because typically when I work with adults with the imagination, a lot of people think of imagination as I ain't got much or I don't practice it often, right? But imagination is much more than just being able to close your eyes and see something. We imagine with all of our senses. We imagine with our smell, we imagine with our hearing, we imagine with our sight, with our feel, with our touch, with our taste, like maybe you've done the exercise where, maybe a hypnotherapist or someone will go into, the waxy lemon and bringing the lemon to your mouth and taking a big bite of the lemon and your mouth starts salivating, your mouth starts watering. Well, you're imagining having a lemon in your hand. You're imagining what it would feel like to taste that lemon because we've probably tasted it in the past, right? So your imagination is much more potent and powerful and multifaceted than a lot of people give it credit for. And so what I would do in part of that process is once I understand their feelings on a daily basis, we then counteract those feelings by replacing them with feelings that would supersede those feelings more on the positive side. And we do that through the power of imagination, but we also do that with techniques to help center those feelings and to maintain those feelings throughout most of your days because it's like learning how to walk for the first time or relearn how to walk for the first time. You've learned how to walk a certain way with negative programming or programming that gets you your results that you have now. We're learning how to walk a different way to get you more positive results and different programming, because at the end of the day, it's all programming, but to get you different programming to get you more desirable results. And so essentially that's my process. And it doesn't end with, understanding, hey, I'm feeling this way and I'm going to start feeling this way more. You combine the feeling, the intentional feeling with the visualization techniques, right? That can help you anchor back whenever you're in a trigger moment where you can use your imagination to think about the meditation or the visualization that you had earlier in the morning. But we do those and then we combine all of that with words and the intention behind the words so that we present in our experience more words with possibility and instead of probability or expectations. And then we understand that we're shifting from lack and limitation into possibility. And that right there is such a big shift for most people because when you can shift the language that you use on how do you describe things and how you describe your experience and yourself, it opens up possibility. And then when you can combine that with feeling your desirable feelings consistently throughout the day, you see true change. You see insane amounts of change. Like with clients that I've worked with, it doesn't really take long when I start seeing them correct their own language as they're talking to me because they hear my voice and I'm like, hey, is it really like, is your experience like nobody listens to you? Like that's what you say, nobody listens to you at work. Does nobody truly listen to you at work? Or is that maybe something you're telling yourself? And the cool thing about neurolinguistics programming is something I've learned is as children, right? If we think about ourselves as babies and we're growing and going through this experience in the world, we're going to have the first time experience for a lot of different things, right? We're going to have our first for so many different things in the first like 7-10 years of our lives. When we have first time experiences as humans, for humans, we must give those meaning. We must give them some sort of significance in our own lives. And as we do that, right, something outside of us that happens for the first time, in order to give it meaning, we have to tell ourselves the story of what happened. So what I've learned in NLP is us retelling ourselves that story of what actually happened is where a lot of us get caught up in the limiting beliefs, is because we position what happened in a way back to ourselves that actually hinders us and that actually puts us at the center of the fault or the blame. And something I've learned as well down the road, and maybe this for people, this will help, is there's a difference between fault and responsibility. When people take responsibility for their lives, when they take responsibility, extreme responsibility and accountability for everything that happens in their lives, there's a great amount of empowerment that comes with that. But when people relate to what's going on in their lives as this is my fault, again, there's the language, right? Responsibility versus fault. People relate to the word as fault as if it's I'm doing something wrong or what I'm doing is causing this misfortune. But it's really not that. It's what you're assuming to be true about yourself and the world around you and the feeling that you persist in.
Yeah, that's that. All of you guys that have been listening to us, I mean, Trey nailed it. What we're going to do is simply this. I'm going to end it right there because everything is there. I wanted him to tell you guys how he does it, how he handles things. And we're going to provide all of his links so that you can have access to him, get into everything that he do, because he will be able to guide you because he's been to a couple of places and he knows how, especially with the imagination. And he explained about the tools that he would be using and allowing you to have access so that you can make those changes. Trey, thank you so much, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. I appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Kid, it's been awesome. It was a very fun chat and I appreciate you having me on.
No, thanks, man. You have a good one, man.
You too.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.